I just turned on the record button.
Okay, great. Are you unmuted?
You gonna check it?
Yeah, I just want to see.
Better make sure I'm unmuted.
Yeah, you're unmuted. You have this. And what? You want to show a picture? This one?
This one,
Oh, well.
this is in the way.
This? Well,
these are in the
no.
way.
Then what you have to do is you have to select it, right?
Yes, that's good.
Yeah, you have to click on it.
Yeah. Good afternoon, people. This is the last lecture of the week. I guess Monday is Thanksgiving, so we're not going to have a lecture on Monday. We'll resume on Wednesday. If you have any questions, perhaps this would be the moment if you have any questions about what I've said in the previous lecture or lectures, or anything to do with the format of the course. Could you either unmute your mic, or you could send me an email? We could have a private discussion. Okay, so let's proceed. And I'd like to begin by dealing with yet another of the review questions. This has to do with the Counter-Reformation. And the question is, I think it's question 7, if I'm not mistaken. Correct me if I'm wrong, I'll just look at my note. Yes, it's, no, it's question 8. The challenge of the Reformation was met by the Catholic Counter-Reformation is the review question. And remember, I'm going to go over all of these again toward the end of the term so that you're well prepped for the final examination. So the Catholic Counter-Reformation, what is this all about? Well, to begin with, I think in answering that question, you want to first tell me what the challenge of the Reformation was. Well, the main thing was that Northern Europe essentially seceded from the Catholic Church. Northern Germany, the Scandinavian countries, England and Scotland, and in other places, of course, like the Netherlands, Catholic control was being contested. So that's the challenge of the Reformation. In terms of the way the Catholic Church responded, these are the following, these are the main points that I'm listing now. First of all, the papacy itself underwent reform. Up until the outbreak of the Reformation, during the Renaissance, you could say the popes were interested in politics and essentially money, power. And they didn't take their religious duties seriously. But from the 1530s onwards, the College of Cardinals elected a series of popes who certainly were political and were interested in political power, but at the same time, they took their religious duties and their church duties quite seriously. And the second point is the rebuilding of the material basis of papal power. Now, the popes had for a long time controlled all of central Italy. Central Italy was basically papal territory. The Pope was a ruler. And what you have during the Counter-Reformation is that the popes consolidate, just like the King of England, the King of Spain, consolidating control over their territories. The Pope does the same thing in central Italy, creates a powerful royal administration. And this provides a certain financial basis for the operations of the papacy. And using these financial resources, the Pope rebuilds the city of Rome as a great capital city. It's the first capital city in Europe, really, in order to enhance the prestige, the grandeur of the papacy, to impress people. The main centers of the city, the streets are rebuilt into grand avenues, and many, many churches and great palaces are built throughout the city. Indeed, the papacy is the main patron of a new form of art. You've heard of Renaissance art. Well, the Renaissance period in art is superseded by the Baroque period, the so-called Baroque period in art. And this new form of art, which is very theatrical and dramatic, very good for portraying religious scenes, dramatic religious scenes, like the crucifixion of Jesus, for example, or the martyrdom of various saints. This is called the Baroque system. And alongside the fine art, you have a whole new architectural style as well. And so the papacy becomes a great patron of the art and architecture, greatly enhances the city of Rome, as I say, makes it a world capital. The third point is the Pope's calling the Council of Trent, which lasts for about 20 years in the middle of the 16th century. Now, up to this point, what was Catholic and what was not Catholic in terms of religious practice or belief was unclear. And for example, there was a great dispute about whether Erasmus was Orthodox. He stressed the Bible, he stressed the philosophy of Christ. Was this Orthodox teaching? Well, in this period, it basically was denounced by the Council of Trent and by the Pope as a suspect of being Protestant. And so what the Council of Trent did was to reaffirm the traditional teachings, practices, rituals, ceremonials, and beliefs of the Catholic Church, including the idea that the Pope was really the head of the Church and that the priests were absolutely necessary to administer the sacraments. And if you wanted to be saved, you have to go through the Catholic Church. Another point is the imposition of a kind of censorship over publishing. The popes established the index, basically books that were regarded as subversive. Obviously, the books of people like Luther and Calvin were proscribed, but also works, for example, by Machiavelli, were also prohibited by the Roman Index. And the Roman Index, I don't think it's ever been abolished. I think it still exists. Another judicial body of importance was the Roman Inquisition, which was basically modeled on what was being done by in Spain to ferret out heretics. Now, I said that there was this reaffirmation of traditional Roman Catholicism, and that meant that during this period of the Counter-Reformation, pilgrimages, processions, worship of the saints, the worship of new cults like the worship of the heart of Jesus, the saying of the rosary, all of these practices of traditional ritualistic Roman Catholicism were greatly encouraged by the Roman Catholic authorities in order to reaffirm people's belief in places like Spain and Italy in the Catholic religion. And then finally, I want to stress the fact that the church recovered by conquering Latin America. They may have lost several million people in England and Scotland or in Germany, but they acquired many millions more of converts in Latin America. Plus, the church, of course, was active in Asia. And in Asia, Roman Catholicism, particularly with the help of the missions, especially the Jesuits, did make a certain number of conversions even in Asia. Which brings me to my last point, the missions. Something like a dozen new orders of the church were created during the Counter-Reformation for the purposes of preaching Roman Catholicism, for the purpose of extending charity to the poor, The Protestants, as I have explained, tended to turn their back on the poor, essentially saying that the poor deserve their poverty. They did not enjoy God's grace. But the Roman Catholics placed a great emphasis on charity. And since there were many, many more poor people all over Europe, this appealed to the downtrodden. And finally, there was a great stress on opening up schools, education, schools which offered some and sometimes quality education. I pointed out the importance of the Jesuit schools, who were very influential amongst the elites. Well, they gave a good education, but they also, of course, inculcated the Catholic religion. So the missions were very important. So that basically takes care of that question. Now I want to turn back to the development
Yes,
of,
sir.
yes,
What was the council called again that you were just
the
talking about?
Council of Trent. Trent
Trent?
is a little city, a little town in northern Italy, Trent.
Okay, thank you.
Trent. And
Thanks.
that's where the bishops met under the control of the papacy, Trent. It's in the foothills of the Alps. Well, let's now turn back to the dramatic events in England in the 17th century. And certainly what we're seeing is, first of all, the rise of capitalism. This is what I was stressing last time. First in agriculture, then in manufacturing and commerce. And with that, the increasing power of the middle class, of the capitalist class, and this class, which was strengthened by its involvement in the capitalist accumulation that was going on in England in the 16th and early 17th century, became more and more confident. And so you begin to see them becoming active in Parliament. In the House of Commons, essentially it is in the House of Commons, the capitalist class made up of essentially merchants and wealthy sort of so-called gentry, who are sort of capitalist landlords, are the dominant element. And they begin, even under Elizabeth, to challenge the prerogatives of the monarchy, especially notable foreign policy, attitude toward religion. They want more of a Calvinist religion, and also the spending of the crown. Now, all of this is kind of contained. By the way, I want to say that this today I feel happy because in 2000, all of this is basically described in a book that I wrote called The History of Capitalism, a History of Capitalism, which was published by Routledge, which is a firm located in London, in 2019. And now it's been translated into Chinese. And I just got an email this morning that, in fact, the book has been published in China, in Shanghai, in this year, 2020. So I feel good about things. And this book would describe the events that I'm discussing. Well, in any case, under Elizabeth, these tensions between Parliament and monarchy were muted because of the threat of Spain. But under Elizabeth's successors, the Stuart dynasty, the conflict between Parliament and especially the House of Commons and the monarchy broke into the open. And you get a real political conflict starting in the reign of James I here, but continuing through into the beginning of the reign of his son. I guess I don't have him down here.
Hey, Professor.
Yes.
Just so you know, we're still seeing your English Civil War map on the screen.
Yes, I just put up this thing right now because I'm glad you're interrupting, by the way. This is good. But I'm just giving you the dates of the second king, Charles I, Stuart. Now, these kings had come, they were, it should be noted that these Stuart kings came down from Scotland. They ruled in Scotland as well as in England. Scotland was this time was a separate kingdom from England. In any case, they began to agitate for greater parliamentary control over finances. They wanted a Calvinist reform of the church. They wanted the kings to butt out of interfering in the marketplace. They wanted a freer market, as capitalists do. And they also condemned the court, the royal court. They said it was decadent. Too much gambling, too much drinking, too much sex. And so they, for example, they were critical of the plays of people like Shakespeare, for example, because it was too risque, too outspoken. The Puritans tend to be against open expression. So in any case, an impasse developed. Every time Parliament met, there was a huge dispute with the king, and the king would say, "You're dismissed," and he could barely get taxes out of the Parliament. And this became worse and worse, especially under Charles I, who came to power in 1625, and basically it became by 1628 an impossible situation. And meanwhile, Charles himself was more and more attracted to the manner of government of the French kings or the Spanish kings. There was no parliamentary interference. The kings were absolute or absolutizing. They were, to get taxes, they had a free right to impose whatever taxes they wanted on the population. No parliament necessary. And so Charles I disbanded the parliament in 1628 and decided to try and rule England simply by himself and impose absolutism on England, much to the chagrin, of course, of especially this opposition in the middle class. So he began to arbitrarily impose taxes without parliamentary consent, saying it was urgently necessary to build up the English fleet. And so he imposed so-called ship money. In Ireland, which was a English colony, had been conquered by the English, and the dominant element there were English landlords, he basically imposed a very tight, centralized administration on Ireland as a kind of example of what could be done in England. Third, he blocked the further development of capitalism. He issued edicts basically saying no more enclosure of the land. The land cannot be made into private property by capitalists. This is, you're driving off the peasants, and it's illegal. Secondly, he tried to control the further development of industry by imposing monopolies. Certain people were given the right to manufacture cloth and others were not. So he imposed royal monopolies on the economy. And he even tried to control labor by reestablishing an old institution which was falling into decay, the so-called medieval guilds, the guild system, which basically was a way of controlling labor. This was also imposed. Furthermore, wherever Charles could, he built up the power of the aristocracy and the established church. These were the pillars supporting the institution of the monarchy. So he did all sorts of favors, trying to reestablish the authority of the big landlords, the aristocracy, and the established church. And finally, he pursued good relations with the Catholic powers, the Spanish monarchy, and the French monarchy. Now, one of the important people in his administration was the Archbishop of Canterbury. This was the highest church official in England. William Laud was the Archbishop of Canterbury. Well, Laud, in particular, was put in charge of religious policy. And what Laud did was, first of all, he ordered that all of the churches and the universities, that is to say, Cambridge and Oxford, be investigated and purged of anybody who was a radical Calvinist or a Puritan. It got rid of hundreds of people who, in their preaching and their writing, had expressed kind of radical Protestant opinions. So he tried to do this, but also, despite what the Puritans wanted, he began to bring back elements of the Catholic practice. For example, stained glass windows, the use of incense, the use of an altar which was basically a Catholic altar rather than simply a communion table. In the Protestant religion, the communion is given at a table, a simple table, whereas in the Catholic religion, it comes from the altar, the high altar. And so he just reestablishes the high altar. There is a kind of Catholicizing element. At this time, England was, in terms of its theology, was Calvinist, but now he's trying to re-Catholicize things, much to the anger of the Puritans. So Laud and the king finally make a grave mistake because they tried to impose this whole setup on the Scots. You'll recall I said that the Stuarts were also kings of Scotland. Well, England had become a Calvinist country during the latter part of the 16th century. There were no bishops in Scotland. They tended to closely follow what was being done in Geneva, where radical Protestantism prevailed. So the Scots were from a religious point of view, way more radical than was true of the English. And Laud comes around and basically says, we're going to impose what is being done in England in terms of religion on Scotland. Well, when he sends his agents up to Scotland, basically these people are arrested and evicted from Scotland. And so war breaks out between Scotland and England. This is in 1638. And an English army is called up by Charles II in order to march north and invade and occupy Scotland, teach them a lesson. Well, what happens is the English army, which is, these people are basically called up from the rural areas. They are opposed to Charles I and his policy. And so the English army mutinies, refuses to fight, and basically they all go home. And the Scots come down and they occupy the northern counties of England. The northern part of England is occupied by the Scots. And Charles is really in a quandary at this point because people are refusing to pay their taxes, and there's no longer an army. So after confronting this situation, he realizes that he has to call back Parliament. So he issues writs for basically elections. This is in 1640. And there are elections in every county in England. Of course, the common people don't participate. The ordinary people don't participate in these elections. This is only for people who have some money. But the elections, nevertheless, return a parliament which is radically Protestant. The radical Protestants have basically taken over the parliament. And they are in a radical mood. And not only are they interested in basically religious reform, but the parliament also now wants to impose a constitutional limits on the power of the king, above all his power to tax. But basically they want to turn England into a constitutional monarchy where the final word will be taken by the parliament rather than the king. So Charles says, you're basically trying to undermine me, and I won't accept this. So for 2 years, the two sides jockey for position. There's a kind of political impasse. But finally, in 1642, the king, Charles, basically said, I've had enough. He himself personally, accompanied by 50 or 60 of his courtiers, the people who from the aristocracy who support the king, they come down to the parliament buildings and they try to arrest the leaders of the parliament, of the House of Commons. They escape. The city of London basically rebels against the king, and the king flees to Oxford. Here you can see London here. The king basically flees northward to the city of Oxford, which is north of London, around about here, and which is a center of support for royalism, for the king. In any case, civil war breaks out. And between 1642 and 1645, England is racked by a civil war, or we can call a revolutionary struggle. This period is called the English Civil War, or sometimes the English Revolution. And we can see that there is a basic division in the country. The North and the West, seen in red here, this is the beginning of the war. This is the areas of England which support the king. This is the center of royalist support. There's a little piece here as well. Well, this is the most economically backward part of England, the most feudal part of England, where the aristocracy is really still in charge. On the contrary, you see in green the southeastern part of England. This area here, including the city of London, this is where the middle class is strong. This is where the wealthy capitalist farmers, this is where the merchants and manufacturers, this is where they are powerful. The new middle class. And this area, and also I would include the merchant marine, the Navy, they all support the parliament. So the country is divided in this way. Now, I want to speak a little bit about what this is a revolutionary situation, because we have basically the old class led by the king, and above all, it's the aristocracy and the big members of the church and their dependents. Of course, they have thousands and tens of thousands of peasants who depend on the aristocracy, so they support their lords. So they do have, the royalists have some support. Plus, they know how to fight these people. They're gentlemen, and they spend their time basically preparing for war. So they're on one side, and then there is this middle class of basically people who are interested in making and accumulating capital on the other. So you have this class conflict. Now, a revolution generally occurs when you have the development of the forces of production in society, and that includes obviously the economy and the great manufacturing and businesses, and some of these had developed in England already. But also it includes the capitalist farmers and so on. They have developed capitalism to a considerable extent. So these are the forces of production, and they're controlled by the middle class. But the monarchy and its institutions, plus the great landlords, basically stand in the way because they control the old state system, is controlled by them. So there's a basic blockage. Capitalism can't advance further because the state is still controlled by the upper class, and this was the case. And I would argue, and this comes back to what I said at the beginning of the class, we're in a similar situation today. The reality is the world economy has grown beyond the control of the existing capitalist order. You see this particularly internationally, where what we need internationally today is basically, if capitalism was to continue, you'd need full integration of the global political economy. What we're seeing today is basically nationalism, protectionism, tariffs, a system. Capitalism needs to go beyond this, and this is the essential cause of the crisis that we're seeing. And we will see whether this leads to a full-scale questioning of the existing order. But what I'm trying to say is that this is the kind of contradiction that brings about revolutionary change. And control over the state is very important in such a struggle because it's a state that maintains the whole economic and social system. So the struggle tends to centralize itself around who is in charge of the state. And this was what was in question in 1642. Now, at first, the royalists had the better. The royalists were experienced warriors and so on, and the middle class had limited experience of warfare. But over time, the economic power of this new middle class, the economic power translated into social, political, and military power. And gradually, the parliamentary side learned to fight. They put into the field a powerful infantry and light cavalry under the command of this superb general, Oliver Cromwell, who led the army of Parliament. He had been a member of Parliament. He was a Puritan. He was a capitalist landlord, and he became the head of this Puritan army. And so this Puritan army, inspired by the Bible, they sang hymns as they marched into battle. By 1645, they had defeated the king and the royal army. In fact, in 1648, Charles II was actually beheaded by order of Parliament. The monarchy was temporarily abolished, and England became a republic until 1660. This radical Calvinist element, led by Cromwell, basically dominated the country until 1660. Well, this radical political element, they certainly were able to introduce radical changes, some of which became permanent. But at the end of the day, they could not consolidate a fully Republican government in England. It turned out to be too unstable. what I'm thinking ahead, or even before, the Dutch did set up a republic, the Dutch middle class. And later on, the French, after their revolution in 1789, they did create a stable republican government. But the English were not able to do so. And so they were forced to bring back the monarchy. In 1660, after negotiations, this son of Charles I, Charles II, came back to England at the invitation of the Parliament, and the monarchy was restored. Indeed, even the House of Lords, the aristocracy were given back their land, and the established Anglican Church was reestablished as the only legitimate church in England. In other words, there was an attempt to restore this period. This moment, 1660, is called the Restoration. It was a restoration of the old regime. But we shouldn't, the basic reason why this happened was, yes, the Republicans under Cromwell took power. Yes, the Parliament was dominant. But beneath them, the common people began to stir up. And in particular, you have some of the soldiers in the army created by Cromwell, but also citizens of London began to demand, we want the right to vote. These people had no right to vote because they were not wealthy. The rank and file, I'm talking about the craftsmen in England, I'm talking about the peasants, I'm talking about the workers. They were excluded from the political process. And they said, basically, we want in, we want a democracy. This is absolutely unprecedented in history that this is happening. They want a democratic regime. And a few hundred of these people actually say, that's not enough. We don't like capitalism and we want communism. This movement of the first communist movement is called the Digger Movement. The Digger Movement. I'm mentioning it because especially it's going to play a part later in English history. But the levelers and the diggers threaten the regime of property. And so even the middle class becomes frightened and they say, we need the king, we need the aristocracy, we need the established church to stabilize English society. And that's what happens in 1660, the Restoration. Now, this happens. All of the trappings of the old monarchy come back, but there has been a big change because the king basically recognizes that he cannot raise taxes by himself. The Parliament is supreme in the sense that it has the final word because it has the power of the purse. Taxes can only be raised through the Parliament. Secondly, my cat is giving me problem. The monarchy's attempt to control the market collapses. The monarchy no longer attempts to prevent enclosures, establish monopolies or guilds. All of the royal interference in the economy is basically abolished. And finally, the Parliament and the courts recognize that property rights are absolute. They're not conditional. Property rights are absolute. People who have property have an absolute right to control their property. Well, that's fundamental to the operation of capitalism. You can't, without secure property rights, it's very difficult to have a capitalist system. So these are fundamental changes. The trappings are there, the crown, the aristocracy, the established church, but the underpinnings have now become capitalist. Well, there's still some resistance. We have this crazy guy, Charles's brother, Charles didn't have any kids, so his brother took over, James II, and whereas Charles was a really smart guy, he knew how to get along with the parliament. His brother was kind of stupid. I would say that in order to be, as you understand now, to be a ruler, you have to be either intelligent or you have to employ people who are intelligent. But James was a stupid guy, and he reminds me of a certain American president in this respect. Actually, he's still incumbent. His days are numbered. A stupid man. And what he did was crazy because he secretly negotiated with Louis XIV, who, as I explained, is fully in power in England. And in return for money, he says, I will establish an absolute government, no more parliament, and I'll bring back the Catholic religion into England. And so between 1685 and 88, James actually tries to do this. And by 1688, Parliament has had enough. And the people who are backing Parliament, that is to say, the big London merchants and bankers, they say this can't continue. And so they secretly go to the Netherlands and they invite the executive chief of the Netherlands, a man by the name of William of Orange, to become the constitutional king of England. And in 1688, William of Orange crosses the Channel with the approval of the Parliament. And James II is forced to flee for his life to the court of Louis XIV. And William of Orange becomes the new constitutional king of England. And this definitively establishes England as a constitutional monarchy from this point onwards. Now, this is a so-called glorious or bloodless revolution of 1688, because scarcely any blood was shed. James II had virtually no support in England itself, and he had to scram. And so basically a constitutional monarchy now triumphs. And basically this new government, although the aristocracy have come back, the Anglican Church has come back, the king is back, but the middle class now rules in England through the Parliament. And so what we've seen in this revolution, which really extends until 1688, is a restructuring of the state so that it facilitates the further development of capitalism. The obstacle that I spoke about earlier has been cleared away, and the state now actively operates to reinforce and strengthen capitalism rather than as an obstruction to it. And so you see, from this point onwards, the capitalist economy really takes off. And so we see a huge development of capitalist agriculture in the 18th century, capitalist manufacturing. We have the establishment of the Bank of England, of the national debt, of a capitalist money. Even a stock exchange is established, and many joint stock companies, including the Hudson's Bay Company. They're all created during this period. And England is now the leading capitalist country by far. In fact, Holland, which began this process, now is basically England's junior partner. It's basically England's junior partner. England is far more powerful as a capitalist country because England has a lot of very good capitalist agricultural land, which produces a lot of food. It has huge amounts of coal, which becomes the fuel of the new manufacturing. it has a much larger population, which could provide a much larger internal market. So yes, Holland was the leader, but now with this much larger population, with plentiful food and fuel, England now becomes absolutely the dominant capitalist country. And it's because of this, then, that in the wars against Louis XIV, and you must remember that war against France is going on all through this, especially the latter phase of all of this. It's no wonder that the English won the war. Louis XIV is defeated because of the internal strength of the English economy under this new capitalist regime. So that it turns out that, in fact, a strong capitalist country can defeat feudalism and absolutism. Even with all the power of Louis XIV, he could not withstand English power. And this is the marks by the beginning of the 18th century. England is the dominant country in Europe, I would say. Now, all of this is rationalized by two, we can say, philosophers, John Locke and Adam Smith. John Locke writes really at the time of the Glorious Revolution, 1688. John Locke is active. He is the philosopher, the ideologue, we could say, who basically justifies the revolution that has occurred. Because he says that society is based on the rational self-interest of the people who compose society. Society is not dominated by some idea of the divine right, God-given rule, or tradition, which entails a social hierarchy and a monarchy based on the God's will. No, society is made up of individuals, rational individuals, who rationally decide their own self-interest. And the political order has to reflect that. The political order should reflect the rational self-interest of these individuals. And if it doesn't, if it is an obstacle, if in fact the rational self-interest of the majority is frustrated, people have the right to rebel and overthrow that authority. And so Locke basically provides a ideological rationalization for what I would call middle-class revolution. Middle-class revolution. Now I can criticize Locke. I don't have the time to do this. He should be criticized because it's you can easily undermine this kind of idea. But he also says some very interesting things about the existence of tradition or custom or some innate ideas, including religious ideas. He basically says that to base authority on religion, custom, tradition, or innate ideas, religious ideas, is to misconstrue where knowledge actually comes from. Knowledge comes from experience, he says. It's not tradition, it's not religious, it's not innate ideas, it's not custom, which true knowledge comes from. True knowledge comes from experience, from experiment, and from the reasons which are applied to experience. Now, this is a very revolutionary idea, which basically is undercutting both the inherited religious, but also the social framework of society, and introducing a kind of rational and empirical approach to society, which in itself is revolutionary. And it issues in what we call the European Enlightenment. The Age of Reason is one of the founders of it, is John Locke. Finally, let me finish. Adam Smith does the same thing with the economy. He basically says an economy operates best with a free market. Adam Smith actually writes a century later. But what the rational approach to politics introduced by Locke is completed by the rational approach to the market economy. Laissez-faire, supply and demand. Leave the economy alone. Don't interfere. And so you have really, from a political point of view, from a social point of view, from an ideological point of view at this time, the full development of a capitalist economy. Next time we look at the Ottoman Empire. Have a great weekend and Thanksgiving.